The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.
For all the brave souls who put their names on a ballot this time around, the heavy lifting is done. Tomorrow we'll tell the tale. So tonight, on the eve of this 43rd general election, we've gathered some cabinet veterans across the political spectrum to reflect on the campaign that was and where it fits into Ontario political history. Then, another look at what this election had to say about rebooting and retooling Ontario's manufacturing sector. It's Wednesday, June the 1st, and that's tonight on the agenda. Well, it took 29 days, hundreds of leaders' events, and hundreds of thousands of doors knocked on, but we're finally here. Ontario's 43rd general election campaign will end tomorrow, and we should know by a little after 9 p.m. Eastern Time who will form the next government. For many candidates, this is just their first or second grand consultation with the people, which is why we thought, let's get some people in here on this last day of the campaign who've seen, well, let's say more than their share of campaigns. And so we welcome, in order of precedence in the last House, John Snoblin, former PC cabinet minister, first elected in 1995. He's in Georgetown, Ontario. In Restoule, near North Bay, Senator Francis Lankin, former NDP cabinet minister, first elected in 1990. In Prince Edward County, near Picton, Greg Sorbera, former Liberal cabinet minister, first elected in 1985. And in Guelph, Carolyn Pickett, the Green Party candidate in Glengarry Prescott Russell in 2007, who very much wishes she had made it to cabinet at some point, but alas did not. But that doesn't diminish from the fact that we're happy to have all four of you here with us tonight here on TVO. And Senator Lankin, whenever you're on this program, we have to do this in the interests of full disclosure right off the top. Do you know somebody who may or may not work for you who has a last name that is eerily similar to mine?
Eerily similar, and sometimes he also goes by the first name Marv, but usually Henry.
That is true. My kid works for you. Okay, there we go. Well, let's have a little fun here. John Snoblin, once upon a time, was the Minister of Education in the province of Ontario, and he looked something like this. Sheldon, if you would.
I like to say that in those days, not very long ago, when Betty Stevenson was the minister, our job in education was to prepare young people for the future. And now we have an additional burden as educators to prepare the future for our young people. And so it's a different burden, really.
So the first question is, don't we both look so much better today? No, that is not the first question. The first question is, what was this election about anyway?
Well, that's been the big question for 29 days. You know, I think that the political parties are oddly detached from where people are. I know, probably like my colleagues tonight on this panel, that, you know, we've been going door to door, and the big issue for people is affordability. It's the dominant. It's kind of like, you know, when the alligators come in the pool, you quit thinking about swimming, and everything else is on the side. And right now, you know, it's $2 a liter gasoline and the food prices, and that's the issue. And to the extent that political parties have spoken to it, they can connect to people. If they don't, they can't.
Once upon a time, Frances Lankin was a cabinet minister in Ontario, and she was a pundit on a previous program we did together on TVO. And that went something like this. Sheldon, again, if you would.
What's happened in the last week has been really fascinating as the Conservative campaign has gained popular ground, which it has. No one can deny that. In fact, it's not a horse race at this point in time. They're in the lead.
Well, we talked about elections then. We're talking about elections now. What do you think this campaign's been about, Senator?
Well, I would agree with John in terms of where people are at. Now, I don't go door to door anymore. I'm an independent, so I don't engage in partisan politics, but I am surely a keen watcher. I have found this election to be lackluster, boring, frustrating. And there's a lot of reasons. I mean, some of the issues are the issues that we've talked about in every election for I don't know how many decades. And I'm frustrated that we're not making progress. But the other thing I would say is that, you know, the issue of the economy, John's right. That's, you know, costs, how we're going to get through this is on people's mind with all the weight of the post-pandemic anxiety and polarized politics. But that's not something that a province in and of itself can fix. So there's a mismatch between, a buck a bus ride, sorry, buck a bus ride, and the actual stuff that is worrying people and what will fix it for people. So there are limited tools the province has. I get that, and I think that shows through in terms of the commitments that the parties are making right now.
Once upon a time, Greg Sorbara was the finance minister in the province of Ontario. Sheldon, if you would.
This statement really says is that we've got a serious but manageable fiscal problem, and that we're going to work our way out of it, and we're going to ensure that we have the capacity to deliver on those improvements in public services.
There you were talking politics 19 years ago, and here we are again.
Wow.
What do you think this campaign was about?
Well, I think it's simple, Steve. I think the question is, does the Doug Ford government deserve re-election? And I think, to me, that's the valid question. And I think the answer is absolutely not. I mean, we have a crisis in our housing industry. We have a crisis in our healthcare system. We have a crisis in education. I remember in the last election, in the midst of the last election, Doug Ford said, "We are going to put an end to hallway medicine." 3 weeks ago, a dear friend of mine's mother was committed to hospital, and she spent the first 4 days in the hallway. What happened to that promise? And we have a crisis with our seniors and caring for our seniors. And as the other said, we have a crisis in the cost of living. And when you add on the inflation that is now infecting the economy, affordability becomes an even greater problem. And there's nothing that the Ford government is promising to do anything about that. So I'd say, look at the record. It's not a good record. In fact, in almost every area of public service, it's an abysmal record, and that government does not deserve to be reelected.
More on that as we continue our conversation, but let's once again, Carolyn, I'm sorry, I have no tape of you from your time in cabinet in the government of Ontario once upon a time, but I do have some tape of you 4 years ago when you were on this set, and you were the Green Party representative, talking about the time in 2007 when you ran in Glengarry Prescott Russell, and you told us about that on election night 4 years ago. Sheldon, if you would.
When I ran there in 2007, the Liberal incumbent had an arena named after him. There was no way that he was not going to win. In fact, the news of the night is that I came in third and came in ahead of the NDP. That's what the journalist that called me said. That's the news of the night.
So that was the news of the night 4 years ago. What's the news of the night this time for you?
Well, the news of the night is that Mike Schreiner has established himself as a professional politician with integrity. He has been able to work across party lines as we expect him to, and he's demonstrated that he will vote in favor of bills that are in line with our values, regardless of who puts it forward, will not oppose it just for the sake of opposing it, but also able to craft a bill that can gain four-party support. So for us, this election, of course, we're hoping that people in Parry Sound, Muskoka will continue with their vision to hopefully change things over there, bring Mike some company at Queen's Park. We're the only party that's has new solutions to old problems at this point. As the others have said, it's been a lackluster campaign, no bold ideas coming from any of the three old line parties. And so we're just trying to get our message out. And now that Mike Schreiner's been able to participate in the leaders' debate, he's been able to chip away at that lack of representation.
All right, let me follow up on that word lackluster, because I've heard it twice now from two of you. And okay, John Snoblin, start us off again. What about this campaign has been lackluster in your view?
Well, let me say first, I liked all those clips except the one with me and you. But Greg, I have a vote for you in a minute. Just keep sign up. But I would be careful about how you use the word crisis. It can come back and bite you every now and then. I just a little caution on that one.
Wait, you know what? You really do need to explain that because that happened 27 years ago, and a lot of people won't remember that. But you
I was hoping a lot of people wouldn't remember.
You did say, as education minister, we're going to have to try to create a crisis here to give you the cover to make the bold decisions you wanted to make. So that's that reference. Anyway, the floor back to you.
In any event, I think lackluster means that people haven't connected with this election cycle. It comes at the end of the pandemic. It comes at a time when people have finally started to live their lives again. And as they've done that, they've found themselves constrained by the rising cost of everything. And I think Greg was right. I mean, this is a global deal. This is certainly a national issue. And so rightly, there's a problem with policy at the provincial level in addressing that. But understanding people's anguish, you know, that they've had their families locked up for 2 years. Their faith in public institutions is probably at an all-time low. And now they're facing all of these problems in terms of affordability. To connect with them at the level of caring was the issue, I think, for Doug Ford. And I think he got that done because of Doug's style. I mean, he can translate that. He is that. He cares about people, and it shows. That doesn't mean everyone else doesn't, but Doug is very, very good at connecting with people, and I think that's happened for 28 days now. Lackluster because I don't think that there are ideas out there that have ignited the public imagination. And that's never on the public, that's always on us, those of us in political parties, whether you're an old political party or a new political party. It's our job to ignite the public imagination, and that really has not happened.
Well, Senator Lankin, given all of those caveats that John Snoblin just put on the record, was there anything any of the parties could have done to be more, if I can sort of use your word, to be more lustrous in this campaign, or was it destined to be lackluster?
I think in some ways it was destined to be lackluster. I mean, if you think of some of the ideas that would excite a certain segment of the voters, and someone like myself would be excited by the vision. Issues like pharmacare and childcare are really important, except that that's been overtaken in time by the federal scene and the Fed-Prov negotiations around childcare. For example, we have $10 a day childcare coming to Ontario. We have a federal government that is working with provinces and bringing forward an approach for a Canadian pharmacare. So those are big ideas, and they're important ideas, but they can't break through people's everyday struggle right now. And I think John's right to bring this down to the personal. And while I think that Doug Ford is very good at connecting with people at the personal level, and during the pandemic with all the missteps, all of the things that I wish I could agree with Greg that the ballot box question is, does he deserve to be reelected? Because I've got a really easy answer to that, but that's not what's on people's mind. They felt a sense of comfort. They felt a sense of being taken care of. They could tune in every day. I don't believe he's connected with hardly anyone in the last 28 days, John. I mean, part of the lackluster, we don't have a premier answering questions. And I don't think, with a lot of respect, I'm just meeting you, Carolyn, it's not old line parties. The Greens have been around as long as I've been around in politics.
No.
I watched it. I'm sorry. No, they haven't. Yes, they have. The party. I've sat 27, 20 plus more than that years ago in all candidates debates with Greens. But anyways, the lustrous, I want to feel a sense of excitement and vision for the future. I think that that's hard to do, Steve, when we're still in the post-pandemic, just emerging. I think people want to be excited about what life can look like, but there are too many questions about affordability, about the future of their kids. So part of it is destined, and part of it was none of the leaders, with the exception perhaps of Mike Schreiner, but he doesn't get the kind of attention at this point in time, have been putting forward something that feels more visionary and feels like a newer combination. And that's probably because the other leaders, in with Del Duca's case, it was in cabinet, but we've heard them before. And, I'm going to mention, God bless her, Andrea and Mike with, COVID and, those sorts of things. There was a lot of stuff. I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but a lot of stuff conspired to make this a lackluster campaign.
I'm just looking up online right now. In fact, the Greens first ran candidates in Ontario elections in 1985. So they have been around for a long time. But okay.
Not as long as the NDP.
Or the others. That is a fact. That is a fact. Okay, Greg, you heard some criticism there. You want to pick up on any of that?
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't think it was a lackluster campaign. And maybe it's just because of the area that I used to represent in York Region, in Vaughan and King and Newmarket and Aurora. There's a huge question there. Should the province of Ontario, the 14 million of them, spend $10 billion building a highway that will destroy a part of the Greenbelt, that will provide a little bit of ease for maybe 50,000, 60,000 drivers who live in that area? I think it's just an awful, awful approach and an awful, awful issue of public policy. It's just, it should not be done. Or, as Stephen Del Duca suggests, should that money be spent on rebuilding schools, rebuilding hospitals, hiring more teachers, hiring more nurses, rebuilding our infrastructure? I just read the other day that Austria, which is a leader in greenhouse issues and climate change issues, just canceled 8 highway projects. We should, in this election, tell Doug Ford that we ought not to build that highway, and we ought to spend that money in ways that help the vast majority of 14 million Ontarians.
Well, Carolyn,
so it's not lackluster for me at all.
No, I hear you. And Carolyn, the Greens have put that message forward. The NDP, the Liberals have put forward the idea that the 413 is an unnecessary and dumb highway to build. And yet, for whatever reason, but it has not captured, sorry for the use of this word, the zeitgeist among the population right now, and has not inspired the electorate to sort of get out there with their picket signs, no pun on your last name intended, and do something about this. Why not?
Right. Well, there's a couple, there is actually very, very strong opposition at the municipal level to that highway. If you look in the area of Halton Hills, et cetera. But we are tired. The pandemic has taken its toll. I know that for myself, with a young child and a full-time job, we are just trying to keep our heads above water. And there's not a lot of energy and time left, unfortunately, for those very important issues. That's why it's so important for us to have green voices in the legislature, regardless of how many there are, because we need at least one person that is going to bring those up on our collective behalf. And yes, the affordability is the election issue, and we haven't heard anything, in my opinion, other than from Mike Schreiner in terms of truly addressing that. So we look at the housing policy that the Green Party has put forward, the Toronto Star, that we're not just proposing to increase taxes or build houses. We've got a full suite of policies to address that.
Well, okay, I get you.
It's difficult to put it forward, but we're saying
one of the
it
things,
anyway.
I'm going to jump in here, because one of the things I did not want this conversation to turn into is everybody just sort of defending, quote unquote, their color in this election. And we've had 29 days of listening to what all the platforms are. And, you say nobody's done anything about affordability. I mean, clearly, every campaign's had something to say about affordability. You may not like what they've had to say, but they've all tried. And yet, John Snowden, I'll pick up with you here. I don't know what you think about the 413. I'm probably going to be built fairly close to where you are right now. But
I was going to say, of the people we're talking to, I could look out this window and see where the 413 is going to end.
Exactly. And I wonder, as a former Minister of Natural Resources, whether you think it's a good idea to build it.
Well, it's been a debate for a long time, and I can tell you this, that I think Doug Ford's quite happy, and his candidates are quite happy to have that debate, because the people who are stuck in cars and stuck in traffic and idling along every morning wants more highways. They want they want bricks and mortar in this province. They want hospitals built, and they want schools built, and they want that kind of let's move forward and let's build again. So I think there's obviously a large number of people who want to get that infrastructure built, and there's some people who don't want to have it built. It's never been any different whenever you built anything. But I think Ford is quite happy to make the argument for the 413. And I think it's a good argument. By the way, living this close to it, the issues of affordability and those other things that matter to people on their streets and their neighborhoods right now, right today. What's interesting to me is the disconnect between the political narrative, particularly at the top of this writ period, and those concerns. How was it that the political parties, by and large, didn't get the message that people were over the pandemic and that they were very concerned about these issues, and that was the underlying issue for this campaign? That was not the narrative that Stephen Del Duca tried to come out with. It wasn't the narrative that Andrew tried to come out with. So how did they get that disconnected from the electorate?
Got any theories about that, Greg Sorbera?
Well, yeah, I think there is a possibility that people are just really exhausted when it comes to public policy issues. We recently had a federal election, and it was an election that nobody wanted and nobody really cared about, and it didn't change anything. So there is a fatigue right across the spectrum, and people are tired as a result of the pandemic. However, an election is a time to re-examine where we want to go and what should be the priorities of the 14 million people that make up the population of Ontario. So, I mean, look, you can have a variety of different views. I am just hoping, if I have any message, it's the day before election. If I have any message at all to the people of Ontario, please get out and vote. Look at the candidates in your area. Think about the issues and make up your mind, because the worst thing that could happen is that we have a very low turnout. I hope that is not the case.
Senator Lincoln, let me pursue something with you, which, with the increasing Americanization of our language, has come to be known as the progressive primary in this season. And that is the notion that Doug Ford wins when Liberals and New Democrats fight against each other as much as they try to fight to replace him. And we have seen it really increasingly loudly in the last few days of the campaign, where I saw Andrea Horwath introduced this morning, and the candidate who introduced her up in Brampton had more negative things to say about the Liberals than she did about Doug Ford and the need to replace Ford. It was make sure, not only defeat Ford, but make sure the Liberals don't get back in too. The Liberals have been doing a lot of campaigning in ridings that were formerly held by the NDP, as opposed to the Tories. And, I guess I want to know how are you ever going to get rid of the Conservatives if the Liberals and the New Democrats are fighting each other as much as the government?
Well, this is no offense to you, Steve, but what I said is that some parts of this campaign are boring because, we've heard it over and over and over again. There are elections that I participated in 30 plus years ago where that question was asked. And, every election is different, and every set of ridings has some flow to it. I, for years, was in a riding that was a Tory NDP riding. And it wasn't until much later that it became an NDP Liberal riding. So things do change, and there's a competition there. There have been times when the circumstances and the public policy issues of the day and the leadership of the parties have drawn the Liberals and the NDP to say, is there an approach? And may I say, and not to leave the Greens out, because that has happened too. And I think, particularly federally on some things. Currently federally, we see the Liberals and the NDP working to stabilize a minority government. These things can be done, but there's a particular animosity in Ontario between those two parties. I remember, there were years when I would say I would support a progressive conservative, not a populist conservative. Before I would support a Liberal, and there were progressive blue conservatives who said the same thing. So all of this to say that those are sort of questions for the future. If the numbers produced, which it does not look like it will do, but produced a minority government, those two parties would have to sit down and decide, not because of keeping an eye on their political future. That would be the wrong reason. It would be because together they could accomplish something that they believed was important, both in terms of public policy, but in terms of a change of government. And, let me tell you, I have a lot of respect for Andrea Horwath, and I believe that if she were in that circumstance, she would sit down and do that. But to ask her that question now, or to ask Steve Del Duca that question now, it's hypothetical, and it's not a fair question. We'll see when we see.
No, for sure. And I guess, Greg, I'll go back to you on this one, because in 1985, that's what happened. Your first election. The second place Liberals and third place New Democrats had the majority of the seats, even though the PCs technically won the election. And the Libs and NDP ganged up to kick the Tories out, and David Peterson's government, which you were a part of, took over. I guess I'm wondering, do you think going forward, if in fact Ford wins a majority tomorrow night, that Liberals and New Democrats need to sit down and more strategically figure out, okay, we won't run in this riding X, and then you don't run in riding Y, and we won't run in riding Z, and, we'll have a kind of a non-aggression pact to figure these things out?
Well, I just don't think that will happen because we have such a powerful tradition in Ontario with each of the political parties, now including the Greens, having a full slate of candidates, and to kind of negotiate around being in one riding and not in another. It's not part of our electoral DNA. So I don't anticipate that. If, as I'm hoping, Ford does not get a majority, then both Andrea and Stephen have to sit down and say, now, what are we going to do about that? And that would not be a bad result. Indeed, if that happens, I think they could work together to form a government, a little bit like the government that we formed in 1985 when David Peterson became the premier. And it may even involve NDP members and Liberal members forming a cabinet together. But to say that down the road, we are not going to run candidates where the other party has a strong candidate, it's not in the cards. I don't see it happening.
Okay, Carolyn, let me get your take on that.
Yes, I'd love to jump in on that. I fundamentally disagree with the premise that the purpose of opposition parties is to come together to defeat an incumbent government. The point of a party is to put forward their values, their policy ideas, and the notion that the NDP and the Liberal and the Greens are kind of one group that can defeat the PCs is just a false premise. I mean, the Greens stand for things that none of the three other parties stand for, and our point is not to defeat the Ford government. Our raison d'être is to put forward the policies that we think Ontario desperately needs.
Okay, John, let me ask you the question from the opposite end of the political spectrum, which is to say, there are a bunch of new right-wing parties out there right now, which are obviously hoping to eat a bit of Doug Ford's lunch because the Ford government has moved, we can argue about how much closer to the center they've moved, but they certainly aren't the radical right-wing disruptive populist party that they were 4 years ago. And you've got the Ontario Party and the New Blue Party and the Ontario First Party and the Libertarians out there trying to get votes, presumably that might have gone to Doug Ford had they not been there. Are you worried that they'll take too big a chunk of the electorate and deprive Ford of a majority?
Doesn't look like it at this point, and you got to be careful with measuring those things. The assumption that all of those votes would come at the expense of Doug Ford and the Conservative Party is, that doesn't always true up with reality. And I think anytime a party that is centrist and that, no matter where they're located on the scale, that's going to invite people to the left or the right of them to form parties and to campaign. That's all fair ball. They have a point of view and they want to express it, and it's good. But I don't think it's going to be a particularly important part of the Ontario campaign. It may show up in a riding or two, but that's about it. I do think one of the things that we've seen different in this campaign than the last, say, 20 years is that the public sector unions have not been as effective at blowing up the Conservative Party before the election. So the Working Families Coalition, the coalition of basically public sector unions, have had a record of spending an awful lot of money to blow up the Conservatives before the election. Kathleen Wynne changed some of the election laws, and that's had a dampening effect on that. And also those public sector unions don't seem as engaged this time around. So that's a very different dynamic going into this election as well.
The clock has flown by here. So, yeah, I've only got 30 seconds left, forgive me. And I do want to put it to Greg Sorbera because I think all the pundits seem to be clear that Ford's going to win his seat, Horwath's going to win her seat, Schreiner's going to win his seat. They're not sure about Vaughan Woodbridge and Stephen Del Duca. Can you give us any insight on that, Greg?
Not really, although I've been in the riding. I think the support for Stephen remains. He held the seat for a long time. He represented the people well. And I think realizing that they have the opportunity, if not to elect the next premier, to elect the leader of the opposition will carry a good part of that vote in Vaughan Woodbridge. And I'm hoping and I'm imagining that he is going to win that seat.
Which used to be yours.
Which used to be mine, exactly.
There you go. I want to thank John Snoblin and Francis Lankin, Greg Sorbera and Carolyn Pickett for coming onto the agenda tonight and having a bit of a walk down memory lane as we talk about Election 43 as well. Be well, everybody, and thanks for this.
Good night.
Thanks, Stephen.
Thank you.
Rarely has talk about supply chains and industrial capacity been the stuff of dinner table conversations as it has been over the past 2 years. But as COVID has in so many ways, it's prompted reconsideration of how we've been doing things. And in the case of manufacturing, it's reminded everyone why making things in Ontario is never a bad thing. That's all put some key issues on the election agenda. With us for more, in the Greenboro neighborhood of our nation's capital, economic sociologist Aline Coutinho, a postdoctoral fellow at the Smart Prosperity Institute and sessional lecturer at the University of Ottawa. And in the provincial capital, there's Dennis Darby. He's president and CEO of Canadian Manufacturers and Exporters. And we're delighted to welcome both of you to our program for a really important topic and something I suspect we need to put more focus on because, Dennis, you're going to start us off by telling us how important manufacturing is to the economic base and future of our province. Go ahead.
Well, thank you, Steve. And you're right. It still represents, people talk about manufacturing or post-manufacturing, but not the case in Ontario. It's about $300 billion a year. It's about 11% of our GDP, and it employs about 780,000 workers across Ontario. And aside from a little dip at the start of the pandemic, it's almost completely recovered to those levels. So it's an incredibly important part of the economy. It's about 80% of our exports, most of which go to the U.S.
Now, you said 11% of our gross domestic product here in the province. Is that number rising or declining?
It has been more or less flat for the last few years, more because other sectors have grown faster. But from a dollar point of view, in 2019, we hit an all-time record amount of manufacturing sales. So it's kind of held its own.
Okay, Aline, for those people who are perhaps new to our province and who don't know, let's go through a bit of a checklist right here. What are the key manufacturing industries in the province of Ontario that we rely on so much?
Yeah, the manufacturing in Ontario has changed tremendously in the past 30 years. Currently, we continue being a powerhouse in automotive manufacturing, auto parts. We're pretty good as well in biotech, pharmaceuticals, chemicals. These are durable goods manufacturing are what we are really good at.
And why do you think these companies, I guess I'm asking, what's the Ontario advantage? Why do they want to be here?
Well, Ontario has a tradition in, automotive sector. We are really good places to attract clean tech workforce. We have a good infrastructure for that. We are very close to our neighbors in the South, in the United States, very integrated markets. It's very easy to, move goods across borders. So we are very good, strategically well positioned to be at the forefront of manufacturing North America.
Now, having said that, Dennis, anybody who has lived here for a while will well remember that over the past couple of recessions, the manufacturing sector in particular has been hit really hard, and we did shed a lot of jobs, hundreds of thousands of jobs, over a period of time. What would you say are the most pressing challenges, therefore, facing manufacturing in the province today?
Well, I think the biggest challenge today in the current is the shortage of labor. In fact, as Lini said, we have a great workforce, but we haven't been able to get as many people into Ontario to support this sector, which includes. I want to just make one thing. Food processing alone is $46 billion, so it's another big part of the manufacturing we do in Ontario. And so we need people. That's been the number one issue, whether it's training and retraining, but really getting more people in Ontario, because there are somewhere around 30 to 35,000 unfilled jobs. So despite the discussion about recessions, we really could hire anyone who's available right now in Ontario.
So in your judgment, is that a cry out for more immigration or for more people graduating from our post-secondary institutions to fill those roles?
Both. Of course, we need more. We had about a year and a half where we really didn't have that influx of net immigration of skilled workers and that we needed. And you're right, we really have to get more people, women, girls, newcomers to go into the manufacturing sector. I mean, again, it's really important for us to be able to have that workforce of the future, because the jobs have really changed. They're not, they're not the backbreaking jobs of maybe our youth, Steve, that we were thinking about. Very high tech, and people have to have those skills if we're going to compete.
Many people will have an impression of somebody on their hands and knees with a pickaxe hammering against a wall, and those aren't the skills you need to be a miner anymore. You got to know how to run computers, you got to know big tech, et cetera, et cetera. So, Lini, let me get you to respond to the same question. The most pressing challenges, in your judgment, facing the manufacturing sector today are what?
That is it. I agree. I totally agree. It's a skilled labor force. Manufacturing sector has changed tremendously. We have upgraded our industries. It has been automated. We really need those high-skilled tradespeople working on in manufacturing. The thing is, our population is aging as well, so we are losing that pool of skilled workers as well. So yes, immigration is a way to circumvent, but also investing in the population that is already here as well, ensuring that we have equity-seeking groups, expanding the opportunities for them to fully participate and enter the manufacturing sector as well. Another issue, aside the workforce and skill shortages that we are facing, is access to capital. A lot of manufacturing firms, they are small firms, they are medium, small firms. They have encountered difficulties, especially in the clean tech sector, encountered difficulties in accessing that capital for scale-up, startups, etc. So that's another issue, a challenge that must be addressed.
Gotcha. Let me invite the two of you just to get comfortable for a moment, because I want to take a moment here just to go through the four major parties' platforms and what they have on offer as it relates to manufacturing. So we'll put some graphics up describing that. For those of you listening on podcast right now, I'll read out some of these bullet points so you can get a sense of what's on offer. This is in order of precedence in the last House. And here are some of the pledges related to manufacturing from the PCs, who have pledged $685 million to Ford, GM, and Honda to support electric vehicles and EV hybrid model manufacturing. Another $107 million over 3 years towards critical technologies. And they've committed $1 billion for developing infrastructure, such as an all-season road to the Ring of Fire in northwestern Ontario. Let's move on to the NDP. The New Democrats are promising that 100% of vehicle sales in the province will need to be zero emission by the year 2035. As part of their labor force strategy, the NDP say they will work with manufacturers to fill vacancies and provide appropriate training. You were just talking, Dennis, about that. They plan to introduce a new cap-and-trade program as well. On to the Liberals, who plan to reinvest from a strengthened carbon pricing plan to advance clean tech and create jobs. They intend to create a North American Battery Alliance. Their platform includes $9 billion in investment over 4 years into a clean economy plan, which they say would create 25,000 new green jobs. And speaking of Greens, here's what the Greens have on offer. They're pledging to implement a comprehensive EV manufacturing and transportation strategy. Over 4 years, they're talking about a $5 billion investment to EV mobility and green tech innovation, and another $4 billion into their so-called climate bank. Okay, that's a lot to digest, so let's take some time here and go through this. Dennis, you've seen it. We're going to go through sort of what you like and what you don't like. So start off with what you like.
So I think it's an interesting, this is one of those times when most of the parties are committed to about the same thing, which is really how to help transform this industry. So those capital investments are so critical because they support the whole supply chain. So those commitments to capital investment, and really, when you use the word green tech or clean tech, all manufacturing need to move to that clean tech. I need to adopt the technologies to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions, to be more fuel efficient in how they manufacture products. So I think the Conservative government has made some choices, and I think they really are quite broad scale, and it really builds on that transportation and machine building history of this province. No real quibbles with any of the parties. I think training is really important. How you get there, how you get that training, whether it's tax credits at the employer level, especially for SMEs, or it's more broad adjustments to the colleges. I think we're all going in the same direction.
Okay, Eleni, what jumped out at you as being something you think is really useful among the party platforms?
I agree that there is a certain similarity across all these platforms, and they're all locating discussions about manufacturing within this broader transition to achieve our net zero goals, right? So decarbonizing the economy, decarbonizing manufacturing, which is great. What I really like is these conversations, they do talk and they address those shortages, those challenges that we have just identified not long ago in terms of skills, increasing the pool of workers and investments, access to investment. One thing that I feel that is lacking is a broader conversation about, as my colleague here has just identified, how are we going to do that? How are we going to train those? How are we going to create those opportunities for people, for workers, to firms to not only attract workers but retain those workers, especially workers from equity deserving groups. How are we going to achieve that? So I feel that there needs to be a broader conversation about manufacturing, not as an isolated sector in our economy, but in communication with other sectors as well, higher education, other partners, other stakeholders, other sectors of the economy. How can we together collaborate and ensuring that manufacturing remains a powerhouse in Ontario's economy?
Dennis, do you have a view in terms of responding to the concern Eleni just raised there?
Yeah, I think what we're speaking about here is that where high tech goes to produce GDP is in manufacturing. So you're right. We have to first of all incentivize employers, when they make new hires, to help them train and develop those employees. There's data from Europe and countries like Germany and Italy and France where they do that does drive some loyalty. So number one, if you train them and provide that career advancement and the knowledge build, you'll keep them. Number two, we need to make sure, and this is good, we're having a provincial discussion, Steve, because normally at the federal level, the federal government can just sort of throw money to the provinces and how they spend it, is up to them, and it's hard to coordinate. Here's where Ontario can actually be in the lead and say, okay, we're going to help bring more STEM graduates in. We're going to help get more of them, the people who are in the current, maybe got displaced during COVID. How do we get them the skills they need? So I think there's a strong need to have a real concrete plan because, aside from labor and supply chain and investment, other than that, everything's fine. But in this particular case, labor is the one that we probably can act on, I think, the most quickly.
And follow up, if you would, on that, Dennis. Do you see one party over another having a better as opposed to worse plan to help deal with those labor shortages?
No, I think they've all articulated the right thing. I think where the current government has started and made some commitments on training. I think it's a great start. And but at the end of the day, in Ontario, manufacturing and the whole area of the industrial economy is so important. I don't think any party would not make those investments. You just have to.
Okay, I want to raise with both of you now an issue that was not in any of those charts we just showed, and that is electricity, namely a reliable and affordable source of electricity for manufacturers in this province. And we heard some rumors about the fact that one of these multi-billion-dollar announcements made by both the federal and provincial governments for an EV battery plant for Stellantis in southwestern Ontario was potentially in jeopardy because the company wasn't convinced that we had a reliable source of electricity here in the province going forward a decade, which, of course, they need to see to make this kind of commitment. Alini, start us off on this. How concerned should manufacturing be that we don't have this affordable and reliable source of electricity in the province anymore?
Very, very. It's a cost. Right, electricity is a cost. So part of this strategy to advance and ensuring that manufacturing is it's healthy is to ensure that the costs of electricity are low. Also, facilitate, it would be great if all parties could include discussions about how can manufacturers access clean energy as well, clean electricity as well, as we transition to a net zero carbon economy.
Dennis, can I get you on that?
Yes, I agree. One of the things when you look at the cost of doing business in Ontario, when you talk to manufacturers, versus, for example, Quebec, where hydro is, electricity is much cheaper, and even Manitoba in the other direction, I think there's a real urgent need, and I thought the comments made by Stellantis, are something that we ought to think about. How do we get us to a position where we maybe are using more nuclear power or using more other clean energies? Because we really do have to make sure that on that one cost input, which is after labor, tends to be the second biggest. After the cost of labor, it's usually the cost of energy, which is the biggest cost that manufacturers face. So let's make sure we have a long-term plan that is inclusive. And I know that there's been a lot of discussion around small modular reactors, for example, as one component. We need to look at everything at this point.
Well, let me follow up on that again, because the Pickering nuclear reactors, which are coming up on, I guess, about 60 years old soon, are set to be mothballed, I believe, in a couple of years' time. And one of the first things that the Ford government did when it came into power was cancel a whole bunch of contracts with renewable electricity generators. And I wonder, okay, Alini, tell us, in hindsight, how smart a decision was that?
That is complicated. That will have costs, and that creates uncertainty for investors, uncertainty for consumers as well. We don't know. We know it's necessary to achieve our goals, our net zero goals, to heavily invest in in renewable energy, biofuels, hydrogen, and etc. Rolling back sends the wrong signals that Ontario is serious about these issues, about affordable and resilient energy system.
Dennis, on a list of bad decisions, where would you put the one to cancel all those renewable electricity generating contracts?
Well, it was one of the bad parts of that whole program was the cost was very high, and that was off-putting. So the problem was we didn't have a substitute. So if you want to change that, what is the alternative? And I think that's something that governments are going to have to wrestle with. We have to have an alternative source. The one thing we haven't talked about, as this transition to EV vehicles goes on, we all know that all of a sudden the demand for electricity is going, not at the industrial level, at the consumer level, is going to increase. So we have to be building that capacity, and we need to be building it now. And we really hope that any government that comes in realizes that our needs really need to match our wants in the next 20 to 30 years. And boy, you can't start too soon.
Alini, have you come to a conclusion as to which party best understands this net zero transition that involves, of course, electric vehicles and therefore possibly a lot more electricity generation capacity that we're going to need to deal with that?
I think these parties, all of these platforms that they put forward, they're very similar. They are all heavily investing on electric vehicles, developing charging electric vehicles, charging infrastructure. But it's important to realize that this is not enough. This will not be enough. So they're all heading towards the same goals, towards the same ideas. But they are all very much limited still. We have to be going beyond just hoping that manufacturing of electric vehicles is going to place us in a very competitive manufacturing position to be competitive with other jurisdictions as well.
And Dennis, I'm not asking you to carry the can for the PC party here, but the reality is the first year they were in power, they ripped up all the charging stations that the previous government had attempted to build, and now they're shoveling money out the door faster than you can imagine in order to attract EV capacity here. Does that demonstrate to you a level of wisdom needed to get this job done?
Well, I guess we never get angry at someone who converts, even if it's late. So at the end of the day, they've had that conversion on the road to Damascus to really understand that you cannot produce the kind of economic output that we need unless we make these investments, unless we're providing the capital. Not just the demand side, because a lot of governments and a lot of parties talk about consumer incentives, and those are great. But what we need to make sure is that there are industrial incentives for people to locate that equipment here, to locate lower energy or to put lower energy technologies in place. So let's make sure that we're looking at both sides. And where it ends up, I don't know, but we certainly can't compete with our trading partners if we haven't got a low carbon, cost-effective energy system to support production.
Alini, your friend Dennis there just described it as a conversion on the road to Damascus. Are you sure this conversion is going to stick?
I agree with him. I agree that we need to really facilitate and pave the road. We need to have a vision. We need to have a vision of the role of manufacturing in this greening economy, in this low carbon transition. And this vision, it has to be more holistic, has to be more broadly. We have to, it has to inform the kind of policy decisions, the policy framework that we're going to be putting in place to ensure that manufacturing will thrive in this, not only thrive, but lead this transition to a greener economy.
Yeah, Dennis, one more on this, and that is the current government of Ontario is obviously making a multi-billion-dollar bet that EVs are the future. Are you sure it's the right bet?
Well, first of all, I think you can't go in Ontario because of our history and because of the size of the transportation sector and all the companies, the thousands of companies that support it. You can't not but invest in that because they're so much dependent on our ability to continue to be part of the next transportation revolution. 60, 70 years ago, we had the auto pack. It made sense. It brought production of cars to Ontario and vehicles to Ontario. And beside it, it brought all the suppliers, the thousands of suppliers of everything from chemicals to parts to ingredients that go into those cars. So if you're going to stay in that game, and Ontario, I think, has made it pretty clear they want to stay in that game, then we need to be making those investments to attract those large capital. Last time it was internal combustion, now it's electric. So I think I don't think they really have a choice, to be frank.
Gotcha. In our last few minutes here, I know you two both have long wish lists of what, in your dreams you'd love to see governments do in order to backstop manufacturing and its growth in the economy. So, Alini, let's get started on that. What's on your wish list that you haven't seen fulfilled yet?
I wish the conversation about promoting manufacturing would be more place-based in Ontario. Manufacturing, it's a broad term. It's an umbrella term. We're talking about auto vehicles, biotech, food processing, clean tech, etc. Each of these subsectors require a specific number of skills. We can just go with one-size-fits-all strategy and assume that we're going to meet all of these different needs that are by sector, that are by regions as well. So we need to have a much more nuanced conversation around how to better promote these different sectors to advance them and create competitive advantages here in Ontario.
Dennis, how about you?
Well, one of the things we said early on was we talked about this thing called the 2% challenge, which means you really have an industrial strategy that attracts at least 2% of the average OECD investment in technology across the broad sector. We said that's about $18 billion a year we'd have to add to the investment in Ontario. And Leanie's right. And then we need to cascade from that. What are we going to do for each of the sectors? So we really need an industrial strategy at the end of the day. The Conservatives have talked about one, and we look forward to what that looks like, because at this stage it's a bit piecemeal, and we need to make sure that we have, we want to know where we want to go.
Dennis, I've been hearing people from your organization for 40 years say we need an industrial strategy, and it doesn't seem to actually happen. Why is that?
Well, that's a good question, Steve. I think, and look at me, I'm aged 40 years, boy. Let me tell you, at the end, what really is often difficult is governments tend to make a lot of short-term decisions and all the small incremental decisions. The Canadian government's often talked about peanut buttering everything, put a bit everywhere. I think it's time at this stage of our evolution, post-pandemic, and the realization that we need this industrial strategy or an industrial sector, that we actually focus. And I think Ontario is in, like Quebec. Quebec is probably the only other place where it's a large enough sector where you can really focus. So let's hope this time it sticks.
Gotcha. I want to thank both of you for coming on to TVO tonight and sharing your views with us. Aline Coutinho from the Smart Prosperity Institute, Dennis Darby from the Canadian Manufacturers and Exporters. Great to have you both with us, and take care the rest of the way.
Thank you.
And that is the agenda for Wednesday, June the 1st, 2022. Tomorrow is, of course, E-Day, and we will start at 8 p.m. sharp to bring you results and analysis until the final speeches of the night from the party leaders are delivered. Now, stay tuned right here on TVO or any of our streaming platforms for The Thread with Nam Kiwanuka as she finds out what mattered to you this election cycle and whether it got people motivated to vote tomorrow. I'm Steve Paikin. Thanks for watching TVO, for joining us online at tvo.org, and we'll see you again tomorrow.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.